Alright, it's been a long time since I made a YouTube video, but I decided to make one because not only has Donald Trump won the presidency, which is literally the best news for America and the world that could have possibly happened out of this shit show of a 2016 election. uh, I do want to announce that I'm going to be making some changes to what I have been pinning on my Twitter, which is national constitutionalism, due to several realizations as I've been diving into the alt-right and becoming more of a racial realist. But before I begin with that, I do want to point something out. Donald Trump, for all of his strengths, really isn't that great of a politician. He's an amateur. And I do believe that we need to get back to a day where we have masterful statesmen who are in the political process, who become good at it, who are skilled, and who aren't corrupt, and all of that. And I know that's a little bit of idealistic, and it really isn't exactly the best way to talk about Trump right now, especially given how shitty our professional politicians and our career politicians are. There are some solutions to that, and that will definitely change given the right circumstances. So he was the braggadocious billionaire playboy, kind of a train wreck from a political standpoint that we so desperately needed to change things up. Uh, so, with that said, I'll go into NatCon changes that I have come to the conclusion that I needed to make. The first one is a recognition of a basic fundamental that I didn't even realize until I dug into it more and started looking more specifically into history. I thought I knew enough about history, but the more you dig in, the deeper you go, and the deeper you go, the more bottomless you find that rabbit hole to be, because history is so infinite in scope. There are so many details, so many perspectives that you have to consider. And for most of my life, I've come to realize that I've been sort of programmed. And that programming came from a leftist Overton window shift perspective of, whites have been oppressive to minorities and they have to pay for that. And as a white person, I've been spending most of my life not entirely appreciative of what my ancestors did, which is something that I'm glad I realized only in my 20s. Rather than, much further on down the road as the country is dispossessed and I'm pushed into a minority, and then all the terrible things that would come with that, with white people becoming a minority, which would be a totally different situation than just about any other scenario of someone being, just like anyone being a minority in their own countries. And yes, America is our country. But basically, the fundamental problem that I had with NatCon was that I put state power at the top instead of culture. And there are a lot of reasons why that was stupid. And the first reason is that if state power is all that you need in order to build an effective authoritarian government, then Africa would easily be the most dominant area in the world. And it really has nothing to do with state power when it comes to authoritarian politics, because Africa is a shithole, and it's always been a shithole because you've got people who fight before they think, and who use state power before they build. And that's a fundamental lack of understanding on my part, and it's actually kind of embarrassing how much of a fundamental lack of understanding that really is. But when you don't even consider culture and ethnicity and race as being so important, of course you're going to gravitate towards state powers that, even though, I even on a deeper level kind of suspected that I was a little bit wrong when I first started talking about NatCon. So that was the first fundamental thing. But here's the even bigger one, the second part. NatCon is what we've been since 1965. I was proposing an ideology that already existed. And I was wondering, I was sending this idea by people like Box Day, by people like Ricky Vaughn and others, and I noticed that the people who were liking and agreeing with it were people who were not race realists, people who were just like the conservatives that I have problems with, politically, personally, morally, and it all came together, which is that NatCon is what we've been since 1965 when we changed immigration to bring in various religions, bring in various cultures. We weren't a monoculture anymore, and we were ruled by laws and state power. The culture has been dying in the United States. At least dying in the sense of it being a monoculture. It's turned into a multi-racial, multi-ethnic, multicultural type of mold, and a new hierarchy has formed, and it is not American. And so realizing this leads us to the next one, which is that there are two pyramids within authoritarian and liberal, classical liberal politics. And I had it wrong. I thought state power was at the top of the pyramid for authoritarian politics, but I was completely wrong about that. As I already mentioned, culture greater than state power. Culture is at the top of the authoritarian pyramid, with religion and state power at the bottom. The culture, and here's the biggest explanation about why culture matters more than state power and religion. Two examples. First, the most recent example, Vietnam. That was a people's war. That was a cultural war. It had nothing to do with communism versus capitalism. It was Vietnam defending their country from another country, a foreign country, the United States, that was invading and attacking them for this ideological reason. Ideology lost to the culture. Vietnam wasn't fighting for communism. They weren't fighting for China. They were fighting for fucking Vietnam. And what did they do? They knew their land the best. They fought a guerrilla war. They were surrounded by a clearly superior military. But it wasn't enough. Because Vietnamese were fighting for something far bigger than themselves, and that was their culture. And so that's one example, but the biggest and most conclusive example that I've been able to look at through history is what happened to Spain. I respect the hell out of Spain at this point, especially with this realization. They had been under siege and had been conquered by Islamic people, which is a religion, it's not a race, but it does generate a specific type of culture as well. And the Moors were not white people in any stretch of the imagination. They were a combination of North Africans and Arabs, and they were a very multicultural thing. That's one of the failures of Islam, is that they don't really create an ethnicity. They're multicultural, and as you would expect, Islam, once they expanded, they had infighting. The caliphates of Islam, they fought with each other because there were so many different ethnic groups within them. And just like any massive empire, you're going to have squabbling between that. That's what brought down the Roman Empire. That's what brought down the Islamic world from being so powerful and so mighty and so widespread and so economically dominant. And then they turned into what the Middle East is today, which is just basically a bunch of tribal warlords killing each other and not really building anything. So the Spanish, they lost Christianity. They lost their culture, they lost their state power, they lost all of that. They had been fighting for centuries, non-stop, but their culture never died. They were always Spanish, and they're never going to change that. And they are one of the most resilient peoples in the world when you think about it, because of that period of time. And then look at what they did after that. They reformed most of the the South American, the Central American, and even the western part of the United States. Look at what they accomplished by putting their culture first as a Western country, as a Western nation. So, with culture, that is definitely at the top of the pyramid, with the examples of Vietnam and Spain as what happens when both religion and state power are used against you. And it still doesn't stop the nation. So culture is at the top of the authoritarian pyramid. And I also realized that from the classical liberal standpoint and in the United States, the top of the pyramid there isn't free speech. It isn't representative government where you have local, state, federal government. It's money. And so with economics, that is the top of the pyramid because you can buy politicians. And you can buy and therefore control science. I mean, look at climate change. Look who funds it. If oligarchy wants an industrial nation to stop being industrial, all you got to do is buy some scientists to make this pseudo consensus that says that industry and industrial development is what's destroying the planet. I mean, how are you going to argue against destroying the planet from a bunch of scientists, right? So who has the power in that situation? The scientists? Or the people with the money who fund the scientists and tell them, it doesn't matter if it's factual or not, it doesn't matter if there's any evidence of what you say whatsoever. We're going to make sure that everybody buys this and therefore has to conform to it. That's the power of a free society. That's money. You control the railroads, you control the transportation. How are the scientists even going to get to work if they have to use your railroads? So, with all those examples, whoever has the money is king in a free society, which leads us to the next one. Why the Jews conquered America. The Jews have thousands of years, and I mean this, thousands of years of practice when it comes to obtaining and securing wealth. This is a group of people with texts back from when Mesopotamia existed. There are very few civilizations and very few cultures and nations that have existed that long. And it's not surprising that China, no matter what anyone does to it, still exists the way they choose to exist. Because they've been around for thousands of years. Well, the Jews are just like that. And so the area that they have been most suited and most capable of doing, which is pursuing and obtaining wealth and control over institutions, it's not a surprise that they conquered America. Because as soon as we let them in large numbers, it was inevitable. World War II was not the product of victory by the Allies. It was the product of victory by the Jews. And they were so ruthless to each other that they allowed religious Jews to be slaughtered to further their agenda. And you can take that conspiracy theory crap somewhere else. Conspiracy theory in general, as a label, as a stigma, is completely discredited at this point. Because the people who've been saying conspiracy theorists are people who have been proven at this point. The media, government, all these people have been proven to be not only lying to everybody, but have been labeling people like Alex Jones, the, evil conspiracy theorist. They've been using that label to coerce anybody who not only politically opposes them, but has facts who are inconvenient. So, when I say that the Jews were ruthless to each other, and that the Holocaust was something that they actually wanted to happen, because they couldn't convince European Jews to go live in Palestine, and take over that area, you can do the research yourself and find it. I'm not going to explain it to you. I'm not going to make a whole fucking presentation showing the facts and the inconvenient truths of that particular bit of history. But anyway, so now that since I've already mentioned that economics is at the top of a classical liberal society pyramid, when you've got a people who have for thousands of years mastered trade, slavery, banking, finance, and have done so in a language that only they really know, and they do so with a book that is basically the Talmud, which basically keeps records of different things that their ancestors have done for thousands of years, codified and cryptographically kept in such a way that you'd have to understand Jewish history just as well as they do, if not better, to be able to even decipher it. And they keep all their good stuff in the Talmud. You know, how they secure all the wealth that they get. I mean, they've kept records of what they've been doing for thousands of years. So, it's not surprising that when they came in there, a country that is a classical liberal country, given that pyramid that I just described, was able to rise to the top. But that's not enough. You know, just because they're good with money doesn't mean that they can rise to the top, because ethnically, culturally, Americans were a white country. American white country. That had to change if they had any shot of jumping to the top of the hierarchy. So, where do you think that the 1965 bill came from? I mean, why do you think the Democrats, after the Civil Rights era, decided to flip the script and go to the Jews? The Republican Party, ironically, in their attempt to appease black people, and then turning to the Jews, started this whole process of turning America into this multicultural, previous incarnation of national constitutionalist state. Of you've got all these different people, and it's a Darwinian struggle for who gets to be at the top of the hierarchy. Except it really isn't, is it? Like I said, state power is subservient to culture. And if you are in a multicultural society, then state power belongs to the top of the other hierarchy, economics. And who's the wealthiest demographic in the country? Yep, it's the Jews. And of course they were. They've been doing it for thousands of years. They get money, they get wealth, they control institutions. That's what oligarchy is. It's mastering economics to leverage political power, which is very difficult to do in a monoculture authoritarian society. They couldn't do it in China. I mean, officially, the communists are in charge in China. But that's really not the case, for the same reason that the Soviet Union broke apart. Communism doesn't work. And it doesn't work not just because it's a terrible economic model, but because it doesn't create culture. And because it doesn't create culture, either an oligarchy is going to form, which could create a classical liberal society, but because they are still favoring authoritarian rule and power is centralized, the dominant culture is going to rise to the top. Why do you think that the Russian Federation is a white Christian Slavic country now? Because when the Soviet Union broke apart, they went back to their monoculture that they had for hundreds of years. Just like China. China is going to become very is going to resemble the types of dynastic rule that they did for thousands of years. Because that's the authoritarian pyramid. So the monoculture is going to take over in China. It already has to an extent, but it's going to take over even more as Donald Trump becomes president and nationalism spreads all over the world. But that's how the Jews conquered America. They diluted the culture, knowing that the top of the pyramid of classical liberal politics is he who has the wealth. Well, they've got the wealth. And not only did they have the natural capacity to get the wealth, but they got everybody paying them reparations for the Holocaust. So we were fueling the domestic conquest, which is exactly what it is, because the Jews obviously don't fight for anything. I mean, look at how wealthy they are, but how few of them actually serve in the military. It's less than 0.2, it's like 0.1% of our military is Jewish. I mean, seriously, these people don't fight. And it also shows how subservient state power is, because the vast majority of the American military are white people. I mean, there's a large number of blacks and Latinos as well, but it's mostly white. Just like most taxpayers are white. So, state power serves culture, But here's the beautiful thing about the alt-right, and here's the beautiful thing about what's going on in America and in the West in general. We are realizing that multiculturalism is going to destroy us. And that the Jews are just fine with it. They don't care. Look at George Soros. Look at what he's doing. Do you really think he gives a shit if whites were hunted like animals like they are in South Africa? I mean, honestly, given what we've been able to accomplish and the extensive adversarial history between European countries and Jews, I'm sure he gets, he has some sort of sexual attraction to it or something. I don't know. Like, it's just like Henry Kissinger said, power is the ultimate aphrodisiac, or whatever it is that he said specifically. I was paraphrasing, but we are fighting the culture war, and the culture war is the ultimate war for our situation. So I'm just going to say it right now. The alt-right has the power to be able to change the country dramatically to start the process to turn this country back into what it was before 1965 and before this previous incarnation of NatCon, which is really the blueprint of what the Jews have been doing for this whole period of time since 1965 in this country. And what I propose is that this cultural version of NatCon is what should be the case moving forward, where we put culture, economics, free speech, and limited decentralized government, constitutional government, as the package. And honestly, that's what built America. I had it completely confused. It wasn't state power and us conquering the Native Americans and everything else. Violence begets violence. That serves culture. It isn't the engine that drove our success. We combined culture with wealth, freedom, and limited government to create the most magnificent free society that the world had ever seen. And when we get both of the top of the pyramid back, the culture and the economics, then we can not only choose to decide to go back to that renaissance of limited government and free speech if we so choose, but we could also even transform it to the authoritarian model. And if we so choose, because, that's a very real thing to consider, because this is, the indoctrination backfiring on the left. They think socialism is going to create a bunch of stupid people that are incapable of ruling themselves, but what they've done is they've instilled an authoritarian spirit within people of, well, the government should handle this. Well, what happens when you have a monoculture in government? Well, it's at the top of the pyramid. They're going to use force, and they would develop a state religion, which would, just by the numbers, become Christian. You would create literally an American version of the Russian Federation if the authoritarian momentum swings and the alt-right wins the culture war, which we already are to a large extent. I mean, look at what we accomplished by getting Trump nominated president, even though the total turnout was actually lower than Mitt Romney in 2012. We were so effective, and here's the thing, just a little throw in there about, the turnout was lower, it wasn't really a white surge. You're right, it wasn't a white surge. It was something even worse. It was the complete discrediting of the opposition, to the point where the people who would normally go out and vote for them were so disgusted with Hillary Clinton. You don't just get your own team to show up. You demoralize, divide, and conquer the other side. That is the victory of the alt-right. It isn't the big turnout. We weren't trying to get the big turnout. We declared war on the enemy. And we divided and conquered them. So that was the big victory. So that leads us to, what do we do with the power? Well, here's what I propose. We've got to change the demographics. We can't have millions and millions of Latinos and blacks and Arabs and this massive un-American coalition. And American is white. The sooner anybody accepts that, the better. You're not American if you're African American or Latino American or Arab / Muslim American or Somalian American or whatever hyphenated bullshit you want to say. You're not like that. You're either American or you're not. And just going by the numbers, there are very few blacks, Latinos, etc., just by the minority that we see in the presidential election for Trump. Even though he got a record turnout of both blacks and Latinos to show up for the polls for him, it was still a total of less than 10% from blacks, and it was still 30% of Latinos. So that is a perfect illustration of how nationalism is ethnic in origin. The ideal demographic model for this country needs to be similar to what we see in East Asia, where you've got 85-90% of one dominant ethnicity and various minorities who have assimilated to the monoculture, which is ethnic in origin. There are dozens, actually 3 dozen, or more than 3 dozen minorities in China. And Asia is actually very very diverse when it comes to culture. When you say Asian, you're looking at dozens and dozens of ethnicities in Asia, all of which are a lot smaller and dispersed in Southeast and Pacific Asia. But in China, 90% of the country is Han Chinese. Everyone else assimilates, or they riot for a little bit, and then the dominant majority tells them, nope, you're not getting anything else other than what you've already got. Sorry. This isn't your country. This is our country. And that is what makes authoritarian politics work, is no minority can rise up against the vast majority. You're going to be outnumbered like 2 million to 1 in that situation. And so, military, you can't do that. If you try to take over the economics, well, that ain't going to work either. Because they can just take it away from you. They'll find you, they'll take your money, they'll prosecute you, they'll throw you in prison from stealing from the people. That's what's going to happen when you have that kind of demography, which is why the Jews needed the immigration policy that they did. That's how they conquered the country. Notice the past tense. So how do you do that? Well, we can't do it violently. We can't do it in a fascist way, because that was the critical mistake of Hitler. He started it humanely, but then he did it violently. Now, humanely is a very simple thing. You offer compensation. You make it worth their while. Make them want to leave, and present a case to them of, you're going to leave anyway, but if you leave now, you can get paid for it. And you can get paid well. So offering some sort of material incentive would be important. And that's easy for the Jews. I mean, they want to be paid regardless, but you can pay them whatever you want in order to do that, and renegotiate it as you see fit. I mean, you could even just say Holocaust donations. The condition of receiving Holocaust donations, charity or whatever, reparations, is that you go to Israel. You have a homeland now. We don't want you here. So you can go to Israel. You will receive not just the Holocaust reparations for all of the American Jews who go there, but maybe even increase it. Depends how wealthy we get after, all the economic reforms and everything else that Trump is going to do as a president. And and so there's that aspect of it, and then there's, you got to go through every list of humane options to send people to other countries. And it isn't just bribe them. You got to make it within their interests. You got to convince them that this is the right thing for them. It's the right thing for everybody. And so it's going to be on us as the alt-right, not just to confront our enemies, but to also make the pitch. Because politically, it's suicide for someone like Donald Trump or someone else who may agree with the alt-right. He may actually believe that this should be a white country, because he remembers what it was like when it was a white country. And I guarantee you, if you cornered him and you told him, Would you rather have the country of 70 years ago versus the country that we are now? Would you take the one 70 years ago? And he would, I guarantee you, he would say yes to the 70 years ago, and not this divided, multicultural bullshit that we have today. But how do you do it? Well, he can't say it. He can't say this should be a white country, because that would be the end of his career. That would be the end of his political life. I mean, they would just trump up charges, and they would find some little technicality to impeach him for if he said that. So we've got to make the pitch. We've got to drive the culture. We've got to win the culture war, and we've got to do whatever we can to convince groups of people like Hotep, like various Latino groups that identify and voted for Trump. We've got to convince those people that, hey, as beautiful as America is and as wonderful as it is, you can build that for yourself. You can turn Mexico into the Latino version of the United States. You can turn Liberia in Western Africa into the wealthiest and most prosperous black nation in the world. We've got to teach them and pitch it to them that nationalism in another country is in their best interests. Because why do we want to give up what our ancestors obtained? Why do we want to give up California? Why do we want to give up, the southwest of the United States? What's in it for us if we just let them secede and take that land that our ancestors obtained? And in the meantime, the alt-right needs to also increase our own demography. We've got to convince white women that not only was Hillary Clinton a false prophet, but that feminism is a false prophet. Get off the pill. Marry a good white man who wants to have white children with you. We've got to become everything that they've dreamed of so that they want to settle down and put this ideological Marxist bullshit aside and achieve the destiny of the white American race and the white American culture. And if we have 3 or 4 kids each, then the chances of whites becoming a minority essentially evaporate, especially in combination with immigration. I mean, that would just swing the whole thing around. You'd be looking at an expansion of the white majority, not a decrease. Especially given the reality that Latino Americans are having just that many kids each, 3 or 4, 5 kids each. Just by virtue of the fact that they're popping kids out like freaking hamsters, of course they're going to change the demographics. Because they take that seriously. We need to take that seriously if we want to be the white majority. But in combination with policy, in combination with humane demographic changes and making the culture war about, well, if you don't want us to dictate to you, why don't you set up your own country? If we can accomplish that, then we will not only get white America back, but we will also improve the world, which is leading to the last thing that I think that the alt-right should push toward. And I'm going to send this to everybody who calls himself an intellectual and who has a major voice in the alt-right, which is what I call Project Exodus. Let my people go, Moses said. We need to inspire that in every minority in this country, except maybe the Asians, because the Asians are awesome. I mean, I'm just going to express something of a little bit of a cucked mentality here, in that I don't want to deport the Asians. I mean, Asian women are gorgeous, for one, and their history is incredible. They are incredibly smart people, and they get nationalism. So I think an Asian white America would be the ultimate country in the world. Asian minority, white majority. That would just be the ultimate expression of a classical liberal government, because you would have literally the 2 most successful, historically, culturally, and otherwise, spiritually even, people in the world living together in a country that would just be second to none. Except, of course, totally ethnic Asian countries. That's a little awkward on that, but I mean, we could even go 100% all the way, you know. Like, that's just a little bit of a concession, but, you know, regardless. Project Exodus. So this spirit of let my people go, we need to inspire that. We need to create Moses figures among the black community, among the Latino community, and all these people who say, we want America to be multicultural. No, you don't. You don't want multicultural America. You don't want riots. You don't want racism. You don't want all this bullshit. You don't want to have to fight with people, and you don't want all this tension. Nobody wants this. Nobody wants to see George Soros thugs burn down neighborhoods. We don't want that anymore. And we don't want the Jews to be instigating that stuff so that they can laugh their ass off while they rob the country blind. Nobody wants that. And so, first, the Jews. They have their own country. It is the first time in centuries, millennia even, that they have their own country. And I'm just going to say it like this. Jews are an incredibly immature people. They are an immature culture. Unlike whites and Europeans and Asians, they've never built anything. They have to steal it. And they've been in survival instinct for how long? So, you could argue very accurately that this is a criminal race. This is a criminal culture. And you know how you fix that? You pull the Band-Aid off, and you send them to a country where they have to live together. Instead of this diaspora, instead of living everywhere but their homeland. You have Jerusalem. You have Tel Aviv. You have Israel. Go there. Stay there. Live together. Decide amongst yourselves who's going to build the houses and who's going to run the banks. Decide amongst yourselves how you're going to build a civilization. This is something the Jews have needed for thousands of years. But they haven't really committed to it, have they? They have their own country, but why aren't they living there? Why do they still want to live in Europe? Well, I'll tell you why. They want Israel to be the capital of the fucking planet, and they want to steal from all of the wealthy countries and subjugate them so that Israel, being a little patch of dirt, is stronger than any other country, despite its, you know, it's like a poetic justice. And to those Jews who want to accomplish that, you know, you're going to keep fighting for it. I'm not going to stop you from it, but we should stop it for you. That is the job of opposition, to defeat your enemy and to make them do what you want them to do. And I'm a nationalist. I think Zionism is the future of the Jewish people. At this point, Europe is rising. European nationalism is rising. American nationalism just defeated the biggest effort by globalism to conquer this country and just end the entire conversation and say, you're a globalist country now, and it's never going to change. We defeated that. So, Jews need to go to Israel, and they need to build their own country. And they need to finally mature as a culture, as a nation, to learn the lessons that Europeans, Asians, and everyone else have had to learn over hundreds, thousands of years even. That's where it starts. The answer to the Jewish question is Israel. We don't have to debate that and, you know, argue about what we should or shouldn't do. The state of Israel is the biggest blessing to the West. Send them there. They're going to have to figure out who's going to be the plumbers and who's going to rule. That's what nationalism is all about. You're going to have to set up your own hierarchy. You can't steal from everyone else anymore. That's over. So that's where it starts. And blacks, the country of Liberia literally has the U.S. Constitution. It was founded by people who used to be slaves who didn't want to live in America. We should make the pitch. Go to Liberia. It has the same laws. It has the same types of institutions. It's going to be tough because that country is incredibly corrupt. There's a lot of nasty shit that goes on over there in their government, and it's going to get tough. But you've got to get back to your roots, and you're never going to be able to do that here. You're always going to be able to be manipulated by people who don't even give a shit about you, who are going to use your history in this country, your history of grievance, your history of being wronged, and you need to build your own country, and you need to live the way you live within your means. So, blacks should go to Liberia. Latinos, if you don't want to be white, if you don't want to speak English, if you want to live that way, go to Mexico. Go to Central America. Now, Mexico has benefited greatly from NAFTA. The economy in Mexico is actually booming, and it's growing significantly every year. What's wrong with living in Mexico? That could become the Latino version of the United States, and then be an example for the entirety of South America to follow. You could be wealthier than any ethnic Latino, South American, Central American has ever been. And you could combine your Spanish history with your Aztec, Mayan, Incan history and build a nation that is in that image. And then it could spread even further. You could turn the entirety of South America into just whatever vision you want, whether it's authoritarian, classical, liberal, whatever you want. It's up to you. And I think that the alt-right needs to not only act in our interests and act as a vanguard in confronting and defeating the cucks, the dumbass, cuck-servative losers, but also make the pitch to every minority in this country that you're better off living in your own countries, in your own nations. And as far as Asians go, I mean, that's the easiest pitch imaginable. I mean, Japan is one of the most wonderful countries in the world to live in. China, I mean, it's China, you know. You love it or you hate it. But as wonderful and as valuable as Asians can be to this country, we don't want the same thing to the Jews to happen to you. I mean, just because you're smarter and generally have a better culture, that isn't going to change the consequences if, you know, we became a white Asian country and then Asians ended up dominating all the institutions. How is that in your interests? You know? I mean, whites aren't going to like that. They're going to oppress you for it. So there's no reason for minorities to want to pursue political power. The ambitious, the I want to rule this country people, y'all need to go. And you need to go rule another country with people who look like you. And the people who don't want to be ruled by your own people and who want to be a minority and who want to assimilate and live the way that the ethnic monoculture majority does, y'all should want to live in America if you find American culture more preferable. So, with what Project Exodus would basically do is to look for and cultivate that sort of Moses mentality within the various ethnicities, and to look at potential Jews, blacks, and others to say, let's go build our own country. And let's stop trying to take over America. Because America belongs, and has always belonged, to white people. If we can do that, then that will be an even bigger victory than just winning this election. This is just the beginning. And with Project Exodus, we could accomplish something miraculous. We could take a civilization that was on its deathbed and turn it into not only what it was, but even better than what it was. Because let's not forget, America was the first time that we became a pan-European country, a diverse European country with Brits and Germanic people and Scottish people and Irish people and Poles and Slavs, all living together on one nationality. We accomplished something that never had been accomplished in Europe before, getting all the Europeans to live in the same country under the same laws, speaking the same language, and not killing each other over it, outside of the Civil War, which was really more of a policy disagreement. And because war was a function of the political system at that time. Now we have nuclear weapons. Now we have biological weapons. Now we have uh, so incredibly destructive of means of waging war that waging war is something that people don't even really consider viable anymore, because it can go sideways to such a degree that the whole fucking planet dies, and nobody wants to do that. So, Project Exodus, we've got to convince everybody that it's in their best interest to set up their own countries, surrounded by people who look like and who are culturally like them, which could have the ultimate result of bringing that American and European national spirit to other countries around the world. Now, we could help them rebuild, but honestly, reparations, long-term nation building, we've done enough of that, and it doesn't work. So we've got to convince them that not only should they leave, but we shouldn't be paying them any long-term expenses, reparations, or any of that shit. We got to convince them to recapture the pioneer spirit that our ancestors did, and to recreate something for themselves, and to create something for themselves that they can be proud of. But to not do so by destroying our own future. But we should definitely help them in the sense of, hey, this is what we did in our history when we had this problem or that problem. But we can't bankrupt ourselves in this process. We've got to be smart about it. So those are the changes to NatCon. This is a reflection of what I've seen in the alt-right and the things that the alt-right has taught me and really helped me break the conditioning of not seeing my own people as something worth defending. It is the only thing that matters at this point. We have the best system of government in the world with the Constitution, with limited government, rule of law, decentralized power, 3 layers of government, economic freedom, freedom of speech. That is just, it's flawless. But we've got to make it a white country. Until that happens, we are never going to prosper and experience the kind of renaissance that Alex Jones talks about. He's deluded, and he's already seeing it with these riots. And look at how these people are reacting. Just a little bit of current events. Look at how they're reacting to how Trump won. And imagine, not just short term, but long term, how they would react if Trump lost. Just think about it. They're not going to show mercy. And now they're in resistance mode. Just imagine what they would be like if they were in victory mode. It's kind of frightening. And honestly, if Hillary won, I don't even know if I would have wanted to live to see the results of that nightmare hellscape scenario. Because I see it in Europe. And I've had nightmares about it. About getting married and having a daughter. And then finding out one day that my daughter and wife were killed by some Muslim who were upset that they decided to wear a skirt that day, instead of covering themselves like they expect. And the piece of shit not even living in that neighborhood, just driving around looking for someone white to kill or rape or both. And then knowing that the courts are going to pick his side every time, saying that's his religious freedom. That is why I now completely renounce what I did with NatCon before. Because Sharia law would have just as much legitimacy as the laws that our traditions and our ancestors built. There would have to be a competition. And I don't want to compete on culture. There's enough competition to be had for wealth and ideas and who gets to be in charge of this state or that state. We don't need to compete over culture. We need to dominate culture. And if you listen this far, thank you very much. The battle's just begun. And if you've listened this far, then I know that you know how important it is for us to win this battle for the culture. I look forward to waging that battle with you. Peace.